Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm Rory McLennan coming to you from Glasgow, Scotland. Here are the latest headlines from around the world. Pope Francis has asked Cardinal Zuppi to lead a Vatican-sponsored peace mission between Russia and Ukraine. Director of the Holy See Press Office, Matteo Bruni, said the timing of such a mission is currently being studied. Bruni stated the operation will be carried out in coordination with the Secretariat of State. Cardinal Zuppi, who is the Archbishop of Bologna, has ties to the Sant'Egidio community. It is heavily involved in peace negotiations in nations such as South Sudan and Mozambique. A temporary ceasefire has been reached in Sudan. Since the 15th of April, the armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces have been engaging in violent battles in Khartoum and other regions. The two sides have been blaming one another for instigating the violence. Earlier this week, the International Organization for Migration issued a request for $200 million to fund humanitarian aid. Over 800,000 people have been displaced within Sudan as a result of the fighting so far. The United Nations says the situation is having a negative impact on neighbouring countries, many of which are coping with their own crises. Russia has warned Western nations that they would be taking colossal risks if they give Ukraine F-16 fighter jets. This was in response to the United States stating at the Group of Seven or G7 conference in the Japanese city of Hiroshima that it would permit allies to provide Ukraine with fighter jets, including F-16s. Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia committed $400 million in aid to Ukraine and supported UN resolutions urging Russia to refrain from taking Ukrainian land. G7 leaders decided to provide Ukraine with further military assistance, while also acknowledging Russia's war had resulted in an energy crisis. Meanwhile, former Chinese ambassador to Moscow and Special Representative for Eurasian Affairs Li Hui arrived in Ukraine with a mission to promote a political solution to the war in Ukraine, now going on for more than a year. Pope Francis has reaffirmed that using nuclear weapons is a crime against humanity and threatens the future. In a letter to Bishop Alexis Mitsuru Shirahama of Hiroshima, the Pope expressed his hope that the G7 summit in Japan will demonstrate a long-term perspective in creating the groundwork for enduring peace and security. During the Regina Coeli on Sunday, the Holy Father also urged the international community to continue to support the people of Ukraine and to support dialogue in Sudan. The Pope appealed for the warring factions in Sudan to put down their weapons while urging the world community to do everything possible to promote peace and lessen the population's suffering. Since its inception 4 decades ago, a Spanish Catholic community has saved more than 60,000 people from various types of addiction and led them to God and to the Church. The Cenaculo community reaches out to people with addictions and difficulties with faith in the Eucharist and Christian charity. Established by Spanish nun Mother Elvira, the community today counts 75 houses around the world, serving 3,000 residents. They do not own assets and instead rely on divine providence for their daily sustenance, including food for the residents. Most of its residents are young adults who take part in nocturnal Eucharistic adoration. Born in 1937, Mother Elvira underwent great hardships during the Second World War before becoming a nun. In the late 1970s, she heard a call to dedicate her life to the poor and the forsaken. She then established her ministry in 1983. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is asking that a federal judge be disqualified from a First Amendment lawsuit filed by Disney against him. According to the governor, some of the judge's public comments call his objectivity into question. On Friday, an attorney for DeSantis filed a request in a federal court in Tallahassee, asking the court to bar Chief U.S. District Judge Mark Walker from presiding over the lawsuit Disney brought last month. This comes amid a clash between the corporation and the state's governor on LGBT issues. On Saturday, thousands took to the streets in Rome to march in Italy's national demonstration for life. Many individuals participated in the rally alongside 120 associations to say yes to life and the family and no to the culture of death. On the 20th of May, nearly 40,000 people began walking from Piazza della Repubblica in Rome's central Termini neighbourhood, past the Basilica of St. Mary Major to the area in front of the Basilica of St. John Lateran. Formerly called the March for Life, the name was changed last year when new leadership took over the event. A United Nations Human Rights Council appointed panel of independent experts reviewing the Iranian government's response to protests that began in the country last year has stated that it is deeply alarmed about the ongoing executions of protesters. It called the Friday executions of Majid Kazemi, Saleh Milashemi and Said Yacoubi profoundly concerning. According to a statement from the independent international fact-finding mission on Iran, they were said to be involved in protests and were convicted and sentenced through confessions obtained under torture. The United Nations Special Rapporteurs denounced the three men's deaths and pleaded with the government to halt its wave of executions in Iran. Unidentified armed men have abducted a Catholic priest in the Imo state in southeast Nigeria. According to a diocesan statement, Father Jude Maduka was kidnapped on Friday evening during an inspection at an adoration site. The diocese has called for prayers for the release of the priest. Father Maduka was ordained over a decade ago and is the parish priest of Christ the King parish in the Okigwe Council area. This abduction is the latest among several kidnappings and attacks targeting Nigeria's Christian institutions, clerics and faithful. An Australian doctor who was held captive in Western Africa for over 7 years has been released. 88-year-old Dr. Kenneth Elliott was freed by Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists in Mali. Dr. Elliott and his wife were captured by the jihadists in Burkina Faso in January 2016. His wife was released 3 weeks later. However, the doctor was held in captivity for 7 years. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong said Dr. Elliott has been reunited with his wife Jocelyn and their children and is said to be safe and well. Dr. Elliott's family expressed their relief after his release. In a statement, the family expressed their gratitude to God and all who have continued to pray for them. Dr. Elliott and his wife, who are both from Perth in Western Australia, had operated their medical clinic in northern Burkina Faso since 1972. The Christian persecution in Pakistan continues. In the most recent incident, 2 young Christians, one of whom was as young as 12, were detained and accused under the blasphemy law. Following a court order, Adil Baber and Simon Nadim were detained by police on the 19th of May. A complaint was made against them by a police officer for supposedly naming a puppy after the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Under Pakistani law, anyone who insults the Quran or Islam's prophet is given a death sentence. The situation in the northeastern Indian state of Manipur still remains tense, weeks after spiralling violence between 2 communities led to the deaths of 73 people and the burning of at least 400 churches. Most of the victims of the violence are Christians belonging to the Kuki-Zo communities who are at odds with the majority Meitei community, who are mostly followers of Hinduism. There are reports that 2 armed groups of the Meitei community were behind the attacks on Christians and their places of worship and institutions. During the weeks of violence that have rocked the state, more than 1,700 houses were torched and 50,000 people were forced to flee. Of the displaced masses, some 35,000 are Christians. Of the 73 casualties reported, 64 were Christian believers. A court in Hong Kong has dismissed the request of Catholic philanthropist and pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai, challenging the government's decision not to allow a foreign lawyer for his trial. Mr. Lai, who is the founder of the now defunct Apple Daily, faces a series of criminal cases in court for spearheading democracy activities in the city. The 75-year-old media mogul and activist submitted a request last month for judicial review after the National Security Committee told the immigration head not to entertain any visa applications for Mr. Lai's counsel Timothy Owen, who is based overseas. And those are your latest headlines. Do join us again tomorrow for more, and do remember, you can always visit swnews.org for more updates. Shalom.